So, good day, everyone, and welcome, Fergus Hodson. Today, we are actually got a special guest, the publisher of the Impunity Observer, which is a geopolitical publication, and an author of the most recent book, Financial Sovereignty for Canadians Untether Yourself from the Ottawa Lethon, which focuses on the trajectory of the Canadian economy and how individuals can best respond to preserve their financial independence. And he challenges you to broaden our minds beyond the status quo. He has an MBA in finance, a BA in economics, and a BA in political science. Is also the founder of Econ Americas, an economic and financial consultancy that focuses on alternative investments, stakeholder management, and jurisdictional arbitrage. And he also has his Series 65 investment advisor as a level 1 CAIA, which is the Charter Alternative Investment Association, as well as the Chartered Financial Analyst Institute. I thought I had a problem with my learning disorders and wanting to learn more. He's also published articles with the Fraser Institute. The Epoch Times is not a stranger to Fox News. So welcome, Fergus Hodson.
Thank you, Nadine. I'm really glad to speak with you. And my mother was born and raised in Canada. It's a topic that is, it's an emotional one for me to some degree, that I care about Canada's future and
Thank you.
Canadians.
Well, we had initially had a conversation just a couple of weeks ago, and I laughed because I was like, stop talking. It's like, we need to record this. It was just so good.
Okay. I hope
Oh,
I can
I'm sure you
replicate that
can.
today.
So, today's topic of conversation is the Alberta pension plan. But you mentioned so
Mm.
many relevant areas when you talked about your book in particular, opening your mind to the expanding beyond the status quo, as well as the trajectory of the Canadian economy. And so many of these things are so relevant to why, in my opinion, Alberta should be looking at an Alberta pension plan and looking to separate itself a little bit more from the Canada pension plan and just the federal government in general. Maybe we can start there. What
Mm.
do you see within the Canadian economy that has sort of given you some red flags, warning signs right now?
Oh, so many. And the problem is that these trends have been growing for a long time. Okay, so and this is one of the challenges that you deal with in your work, your financial advisor, which means basically looking beyond the short-term horizons. And in, let's say, the journalism sector, there's a term slow news. And the problem is that most of the important things that happen slowly, right? In that the evolution of a country doesn't change overnight. And so for a long time, I've seen Canada basically struggling under a combination of ills. So let's say stagnant or declining productivity, capital per worker is going down, cost of living is going up, taxation is going up. There's a more regulated and centralized economy, higher levels of corruption, a declining sense of national identity, unity. I mean, and what made me motivated to write about this? I mean, I've been writing for Canadian think tanks since 2009. So the last 15 years, when I first went, I worked out at AIMS, the Atlantic Institute for Market Studies in Halifax, Canada, years ago. Anyway, the what happened is that the slow news just had been kind of boiling along, accumulating. People weren't really noticing, maybe a little bit. And then suddenly during the COVID crisis, or whatever you want to call it, the spread, people just had this bit of a aha or wake up moment, right? And this culminated in the trucker or freedom convoy. And that's when basically people said, enough, I can't handle it anymore. And we've been squeezed for too long. And the trajectory is painful to think about, to be frank, that Canada really, in my opinion, is headed on a trajectory towards a more Argentina-like scenario. And I'm not sure whether any of your listeners or viewers have been to Argentina. I lived there for a year. But the rot that I mentioned, let's say the declining confidence in the loonie or the currency, the rise of corruption and centralization, we can just see it before
Mm.
our eyes. And the one of the things that makes this even more, let's say, frustrating is the way that you have these government bought off media outlets like the CBC, and I hate to say, but almost every other media outlet now. There's such a vast divide between what they say and what independent outlets like, let's say, the Western Standard or the Rebel Media, the likes of these. There's just such a huge distance between them. That should be a red flag to people. that that something is wrong here. There's a version of reality that is not reality. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really funny because the Canada Pension Plan has been really promoting a lot on social media, pushing since Alberta has talked about leaving, about how great it is, one of the best in the world. And
Yeah.
it's become this sacred cow to so many individuals, much like
Mm.
I compare it to the myth that Canada has the best healthcare in the world. It's just nobody's really challenged
Okay.
it yet. And many of the things that you just pointed out
Mm.
from the economic standpoint, the big, 30,000-foot view of Canada, all of these things have a negative impact on the Canada Pension Plan. And of course, I'm tasked right now with trying to help Albertans see the merits of an Alberta pension plan. So, what are some of your thoughts?
Mm.
Because you talked about the corruption, you talked about, the rot, the political influence. All of that, in my opinion, has totally infiltrated the Canada Pension Plan as well.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. So there's just so much to say about this topic. And right up front, I should say that I don't believe in any government pension plan, that people should manage their own investments. Any coerced plan is going to be vulnerable to all sorts of what we call public choice problems, where rent seekers get in there and start grifting and people play politics. Okay. So this has all happened in the case of the Canada. I call it the Canada Ponzi plan because everyone, people should know this. I don't know. Sometimes I scratch my head, but the fact is that the Canada pension plan is not a pension plan. It is a pay as you go process. So there's a taxation system, and then there's a welfare payment system, and there's some relationship between the two, and they do have about half a trillion in assets generating returns, but that's more just a distraction. The fact is that if you were to say, "Oh, you don't have to opt in anymore," it would go down. That's why it's a Ponzi scheme, because it's relying on new participants, to the suckers, I call them, to pay in for the past participants, and the past participants are getting more than the actual return on their assets because their assets have already been spent. Okay, so this is why there's a key distinction between what's called a defined benefit plan and a defined contribution plan, right? Where defined benefits, which is what the pension, the CPP is, says you will get a certain amount just guaranteed by somebody, versus a defined contribution plan says you will put in money into an account and you'll get whatever comes out at the end. We don't know. So the contribution is defined, but not the outcome. And private companies for decades have basically made the switch away from defined benefit plans because they're inherently unstable. But the Canada pension plan is both defined benefit and they don't pay in enough money, right? So they've made promises or payouts greater than the money going in. That's why we have an unfunded liability. Now, I remember when I was a young man and learning about all this, I thought, what is this unfunded liability? So let me try to explain this clearly. When people pay into the Canada pension plan, they assume that the federal government has a debt to them, that the federal government owes them something, right? So that's a debt the federal government has. Although it's not necessarily an explicit debt in law, that's where it's a bit murky. So the federal government takes your money, taxes you, it has an asset, and then it has an obligation to pay you. And the problem is that they have well, because they're using money to pay out the people right now, they don't have enough assets to pay for what they owe in the future. And this, I'm trying to summarize this. Basically, they've been digging a hole for decades, and now we're stuck. That's why there's all this wrangling that when Alberta wants to leave, it is revealing the truth about the Canada Pension Plan that it is a Ponzi scheme, it is deceitful, and they basically hide the fact that they've accumulated, even officially, more than $1 trillion debt, which is equal to the total national debt of Canada. Just in this one plan,
Yeah,
one
and that's
program.
just one benefit program. And for me, when
Exactly.
reviewing the chief actuarial report, what stood out as well is our contributions currently exceed the expenditures, but that's about to change. So come 2026, for the first time, the expenditures will actually
Yeah.
exceed the contributions. And so I can only imagine how quickly and how large that unfunded liability is going to grow.
Well, Nadine, there's actually a little bit of a proviso there because this year, and I'm sure you're aware of this, basically the taxes on for the Canada Pension Plan are going up, right? There's they call it an enhancement, which sometimes, like I said, I just do not understand how people call a higher tax an enhancement, but whatever, So we do live in an Orwellian world sometimes. So taxing you more as an enhancement, and there's going to be, I mean, it depends how much you make. This way it gets very confusing for many people, but basically the Canada Pension Plan, you are taxed at a rate of 11%, but that is, well, it's 9.9. It was last year. Now it's going up. It's but over a certain range of your income. And now from this year, they're adding a different income band where you'll still be taxed at a lower rate. So it's kind of this almost, I don't know. There are two layers of taxation from this year to try to catch up with this. But the truth is that already, even at the 9.9%, you're paying three times what you were paying at the beginning. So already the taxes went from 3.6 to begin with to 9.9 to 11. Basically, this is a downward spiral of higher taxes to pay for mismanagement of assets, right? Or for broken promises or promises that could not be fulfilled. And my prediction basically is that the taxes will just keep rising as they have. And what will happen eventually is that because of this baby boomer generation and just so many elderly people drawing upon this, and which is not going to change, we're not going to suddenly start having 6 kids again, right? The the fact is we'll have an older generation, and probably there will be pushes to raise the age of eligibility. This is where people have to realize that get past all the smoke and mirrors. The fact is the Canada Pension Plan is a taxation system and a welfare program, and the federal government can change it as it sees fit. It already has been. It's been increasing the taxes. It's going to change the benefits, and you don't have anything set in stone. The return you get is about 2% per year. So all the flowery press releases about, oh, we made 10.9 or 11% the last decade, that's all irrelevant. What do you actually get from what you paid in? So, and look, there's just a lot to say about it, but one thing that is important is that politicians sometimes listen to voters. They also sometimes listen to jurisdictional competition, right? So and this is why centralization in Canada is such a deathly blow, because you need competition between the provinces to offer better services, right? So basically, provinces are competing with each other to offer better services at lower prices, and prices in terms of taxes, and people can move with their feet or move their money in terms of their investments. This is a crucial um, form of accountability. And so long as the Canada Pension Plan is national and Canadians have basically no escape, except maybe if they move to Quebec, although I don't recommend it, but so they face very little accountability. And basically the only way for Canadians to get out of it is to
Yeah,
leave the
well, one of
country.
the things I find very interesting
So
is you don't see Quebec banging on the CPP door saying, let us in either.
you do not. And the truth is that this is one of the key tests. You would say If we were not members of CPP, right? If Alberta were not in CPP, would we suddenly sign up? Absolutely not, right? The only reason people have cognitive biases, again, this is one thing that's relevant to your work. We have these things, the cognitive biases that lead our judgment astray. A very prominent one is status quo bias, that we feel more familiar with what we know and we're inclined to stay that way, even if the alternative would be better. The other one is called endowment, the endowment bias, where things we have we assume to be of more value than things we don't have, even if the things we don't have would be of more value. This is when we buy stocks, we tend to hold on to them longer than we should, for example, or when we go to a vehicle salesman, as soon as we drive the car, we feel like it's ours, we want it, even if another car would be better for us, right? So look, I mean, there's all sorts of data on this saying it's basically a no-brainer for Alberta to get out of the pension plan, right? Now, the CBC and the Prime Minister are all throwing a hissy fit because they know that they're getting a free ride off Albertan taxpayers, basically. And the idea of a province leaving and building a successful plan would be humiliating to them, embarrassing, that all their fancy pants pretense of eloquence, all the stupidity is a load of garbage.
Very eloquently put. And we got a lesson in behavioral finance there as well. So, I think that's
Sure.
important for people to realize, though. Unfortunately, it's usually pain that drives people, and they haven't felt necessarily the pain as it relates to the CPP because it hasn't really been brought to the forefront, the actual concerns or issues that
Mm,
actually exist. And we've talked now about, the Canadian economy. We've talked about the demographics. And the reality is, in those two areas in particular, Alberta outperforms the rest of Canada. But yet, the part that
yeah.
I find particularly scary is Ottawa's determination to destroy the Alberta economy in particular, and to politically influence through ideology, through regulation, um, and steer the ship away from things like oil and gas, and then to try and steal the power from the provincial jurisdictions, of which, Alberta has the right to control its own natural resources, for example. And Stephen Gibault, our,
Mm,
Minister of Natural Resources, or federally, just came out and said that we're not even going to build any more roads. It's this grandiose ideology and these plans that they have, and then they just push them on everybody else. And like you just said, we need that competition among the provinces, because you want the competition to bring the best ideas, to bring the best results, to see the best outcomes. So let's talk about that a little bit,
mm,
because we're seeing housing skyrocket. We're seeing inflation, and
yeah.
immigration is one area what we haven't really focused in on. And for me, I always talk about it's a quality issue, not a quantity issue, or it should be. Right now, they're bringing a tremendous number of
Yeah.
people into the country, thinking that that's going to solve some of the problems. But in essence, I think that's creating and worsening the problems.
Yeah. So this is this. So I have a chapter in the book dedicated exclusively to the CPP, and I mentioned the immigration so-called solution. The fact is that every new participant in CPP is digging the hole deeper, right? The more entrenched it becomes. And it's just such a cowardly and lazy thing to do, to think, oh, we'll just bring in more people to pay into the Ponzi scheme. Pathetic. I always feel sorry for these people. They are just suckers for punishment to come in and pay Canadian taxes. And who knows what they'll get later on when they retire. And in fact, you might have noticed this, but there's a lot of reporting now about onward migration. So people going to Canada and then realizing it's not what it's cracked up to be, and then leaving, unfortunately, right? Because my grandparents moved to Canada in the mid 1950s, and it was a totally different place. right? So much has happened between then and now. They moved to Canada for, yes, better quality of life, lower cost of living, opportunity. And my grandparents had 9 children raised in Calgary. And it's just not that way anymore. Canada is not this, let's say, beacon of opportunity anymore. I went there myself looking for work more than a decade ago and found it to be a difficult place to get
Yeah,
started.
fortunate for you, you actually figured that out early. Some of us.
Also, I realize, yeah, I realize too that Canada is incredibly over credentialed, right? If you just fund higher education to such a degree, you basically need a master's degree to get an entry level job. It's insane.
Yeah, and one of the things you touched on too. So let's talk about a little bit about the investing, because some people are like, well, CPP just does such a good job at the investing part of it, and they've gotten 10% rates of return. But the reality is, the
Mm,
Canada Pension Plan really is a very expensive plan to administer and to manage. And realistically, it's just achieving average results, to be honest. And more importantly, like you pointed out, this is a benefit plan, something the government really owns. It's not your pension plan. And then add
right.
into that the fact that they can make the changes, increase the contribution rates, decrease the amount that you get paid potentially. They can, change the benefits at any time of their own accord. They don't even have to consult anybody to do
Yes.
that.
Yeah.
But I want to focus a little bit on the returns and the administration, because so many people seem to think that this is such a well managed plan.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. One of the key challenges with assessing any fund's performance is the comparison metric,
The
right?
benchmark.
What are you comparing it to? And yeah, the benchmark. So the Canada Pension Plan, I think it's investment committee or investment board, they will promote that they do better than other pension plans. Oh, great. Really? So they'll do better than, I don't know, other also, let's say, mismanaged government pension plans around the world. It's a weak benchmark to begin with. And you have to remember that with the economies of scale that a pension plan has also, and the long time frames, because they don't need as much liquidity, right? They ideally can invest for 20, 30 years. They should be making much better returns than the average person. And so really a better comparison would be to university endowments or to private pensions, but they would never compare themselves to those because they would look very ordinary. And the fact is that the university endowments in particular have crushed public pension systems and performance. And the university endowments have led the way in terms of venture capital, alternative investments, private equity, where the public pensions have been way behind that. And the truth is, public pensions they shouldn't be trying to get huge performance because they're supposed to be giving 100% certain returns. Really, if that's what you want, contractually certain returns, you should just be buying bonds, risk-free investments, and saying we can only guarantee, if we're going to be guaranteeing this, we can't promise great returns. So but the problem is that this whole point about their management success or lack thereof is problematic because half of the money you pay in is going to pay people already. So how can it be generating returns when it's already been spent, right? So it's all a big sideshow that distracts from the fact that this money is just being paid to people who are already collecting. So they can, like I said, they can earn 10, 11, 20%. But the fact is, most of the money that's going in is not actually earning that; it's being paid out right away. So you are still only getting 2%. And so not only there's a problem too. They have been slow to get into the real, let's say, innovative areas of private equity, venture capital, whatever. But they've been the first. They're just jumping on the bandwagon with all this stakeholder capitalism and ESG, all this feel good silliness. And it just, because this is the problem when you when people have no choice but to pay in, what do you care? You can do all this genuflecting, virtue signaling. You can play games because financial performance, unfortunately, has been forgotten as the ultimate arbiter. You are going to be susceptible to political intimidation or gamesmanship, and that's precisely what has happened to the
Yeah, and
Canada
that's one
pension
of the
plan. They are just they don't even hide it. They don't
Oh,
hide it at all. They're
absolutely.
parading it.
Up until I think this year, it was the very first page of the CPPIB was "Welcome to a carbon neutral Canada," and I went, "How's that for a slap in the
Yeah.
face
So
to Alberta in particular?" And there is no hiding it. They are very clear on their intent around diversity, equity, and inclusion and ESG, to the point where even their board of directors is
yeah.
just that's their area of expertise. I think 6 out of the 13, that's their areas of expertise is in ESG. um, I look at it
Right.
investing and I'm going, the mandate for the CPP is supposed to be to maximize returns, and mitigate risk.
Mm.
And so I can understand their
Yeah.
venture, into private equity and to try and model some of what the endowment funds have been doing for a lot longer than the Canada Pension Plan. And I think that in 1997 was the impetus to make the change. Even you mentioned about
Mm.
population there and the excess. It's only the surplus that gets invested. And if you look on a Canada wide perspective, the only reason they have a surplus right now on the pay as you go is because of Alberta's contribution to that. So, when Chrystia Freeland panicked,
Mm.
because Alberta threatened that it was going to leave, I think that was a game changer, because they then realized, oh my goodness, if that happens, the game is up. Like, how are we going to answer to this?
Yeah. Yeah. So let's just I don't know whether you've shared these numbers with your audience, but the win to Alberta is huge, right? So that Albertans, this is an assessment from the Fraser Institute, published in the Calgary Sun. Albertans could pay 40% less. That is huge, right? So Alberta has been the whipping boy of Ottawa for a long, long time, and it's an equalization. It's in, like you said, energy policy. It's in the pension plan, and the sometimes I don't understand why there's not more support for just getting out right away. Maybe the fear mongering, maybe it is the dominance of the CBC as a sort of media propagandist dominating the airwaves. But if you just look at the numbers, it is a no brainer that Albertans would pay enormously less, and the rest of the country could stop being, I don't want to say parasites, but let's say leaning on Alberta. If Alberta were to leave. And if they all hate, this is the irony too, that all these people who hate on Alberta so much, okay, don't take our money then. Let us leave. You want to have your cake and eat it too. Forget it.
Yeah. And so, with respect to the Canada Pension Plan, um, understanding sort of
Mm,
those three drivers around the economy, the demographics, the immigration policies, the anti-Alberta kind of regulatory environment that we're fighting and up against. You know, we're even losing here some of
yeah.
the support from conservatives on the Canada Pension Plan and establishing an Alberta pension plan. A lot of it is misinformation and a lot of it is fear mongering that's being shared by the mainstream media and, of course, our opposition here, the NDP. But, you have that
Mm,
economics, you have that political background, you have that financial expertise and experience. You look at the numbers much like I do. I look at the numbers, I'm looking at the data, and I just cannot see any reason why we shouldn't do this. The only risk I could identify is the fact that, our Alberta government itself is not without some of the political ideologies. And we definitely want to ensure that it is truly an independent board that would manage this Alberta pension plan. But what advice would you give to Albertans? What are the things that you would say, hey, take a step back? Park the emotions and the fear mongering for a moment, and you need to focus on the data, because people don't even know, honestly, unless they're in this space, what questions to ask.
Well, there's one topic that we've not addressed that I should have addressed earlier. I would say to Albertans, study or learn what these unfunded liabilities are. Okay. The fact is, the pension plan has assets and then it has obligations or supposed obligations. But the truth is, even if they're not explicit debts, they're going to pay them because the elderly generation, they vote, they're determined, they feel entitled, they're going to get it. This is a problem, and it's growing. It's growing. And the bit which I discuss in my book is that the 1.1 trillion, which is the reported number in this actuarial report, which comes out every 3 years. So the latest one is December 31, 2021. So I guess there'll be one at the end of this year, or the number from the end of 2024. This one, it's hidden. It is in a footnote in Appendix C, page 187. I cannot believe it. It's almost like you have to make this stuff up. How determined are you to hide it? Put it in small print at the bottom page where no one will ever find it,
It
even if
was
you want to
one
find it.
line under
It's so hard to find.
acknowledgments.
Yeah, so and that number is, in my opinion, deceitful, because when you have future payments that are supposed to be 100% guaranteed, they should not be discounted at a rate of return which is for what you're going to get on your investments. They need to be discounted at a risk-free rate, which is 2 or 3%. And if you do that, you at least double the debt. So you have a debt in excess of 2 trillion. It could be 4 trillion. I don't know the numbers in terms of the precise calculation there, but it makes a huge difference the discount rate you use over decades. And they have discounted these future obligations at a rate which is much too high for a risk-free payment. If you want risk-free, you need to go with straight, let's say inflation-protected securities or inflation-protected bonds. So that, to me, I think if people understand that they've been digging a hole and they're just digging deeper and deeper and further entrenching themselves with the federal government, they would realize this is a toxic relationship, a toxic plan, and they would want to escape. Even if the escape is going to cause vindictiveness from Ottawa, it's better to get out rather than to dig the hole deeper, or cut
I
the
keep
bleeding off
telling
now.
people this is our one and only opportunity. Now that we have put it out there, I think they will make sure, if we do not follow through on this, I think Ottawa will make sure to close the window on this opportunity to make sure that Alberta will not get an opportunity to leave again. So let's focus a little bit on what a really good Alberta pension plan could look like, in your opinion.
There actually already is. I was looking up this morning different gauges of pension plan quality. So there are these things called the Santiago Principles and the Lindbergh-Mudwell Transparency Index. And in fact, the Alberta Investment Management Corporation already has a 10 out of 10. It's about as good as you're going to get. So I assume that this is where you would know better than I do. I assume that's for the public pensions of Alberta, that they already have relatively transparent and well-managed funds. And one of the principles is clear investment policies. Now, ideally, in a place like Alberta, there'd be constituent support for just the returns. That's all we want to hear about. Okay, we don't want to hear about any kind of social activism from people who are supposed to be investing our money. Further, they have annual reports rather than every 3 years like the Canada Pension Plan, right? So there already is somewhat of a model in place. Look, I this is where I don't know all the funny details of what the requirements would be, because apparently Alberta has to match the generosity of the Canada Pension Plan, which is maybe would force Alberta to have a defined benefit plan, which is, like I said, inherently unstable and rife towards or risk. It is at risk of falling into political promises without
Mhm.
political costs, right? Because every politician, unfortunately, faces a short-term horizon that he's got to get elected, and so he will basically promise the world now and make someone else pay in the future. And so that inevitably contaminates even pension plans, which is exactly what has happened with the Canada Pension Plan. It's been growing for decades. So this is why the Alberta Pension Plan is not going to be perfect. It's not going to be accountable. Any sort of coerced plan is going to suffer those challenges, but at least there would be jurisdictional competition. You'd have three. You'd have Alberta, Quebec, and the national plan competing with each other, which would be at least a little bit of accountability. And Alberta, because the Alberta people, this is not a secret to you or the listeners here, have a bit more rugged individualism that would somewhat manifest in any kind of sovereign wealth fund, or what you call provincial wealth fund, I
Yeah,
guess.
and so
Yeah.
what I've been trying to encourage people is, let's take, the fear out. Let's look at the numbers. I mean, the numbers just make sense. So many people are scared that, Alberta came out and said 334 billion. That's what we're entitled to, the Canada Pension Plan. Now, I totally can find that number 100% believable. If you look at how much Alberta has been contributing, like you
Mm.
said, only 64% of Albertans actually, well, we're contributing, so that would leave 36% actually as a surplus for us to actually invest. And I mean, there's a savings of $5 billion, apparently, according to the LifeWorks report, that we could be investing in the first year. So I look at, as on the pay as you go, if you're just going to compare an Alberta pension plan to a Canada pension plan, Alberta is just in such a better position to do so. And I've been trying to understand, where the fear has been coming for a lot of people. And I think it is that bias, cognitive dissonance, where people just, seniors don't mess with my pension. That's really the big argument. Don't mess with my pension. But they don't understand the right questions to ask and where the risks lie in that pension. And it may not lie there for them. So one of the things I've been really trying to do is encourage the younger generation, my generation, and looking out for my children. We need to look longer term, because, the unfunded liabilities, as you said, are going to continue to grow. The risks, in my opinion, around the demographics, the economy, and immigration, on the Canadian side, are something that Alberta can influence more closely to home and outperforms Canada. So reducing the risk. So I think there is a greater risk to stay in the Canada Pension Plan, despite all the faults of a government, Alberta pension plan. I think there is still better opportunity to influence how that is set up, established, run, and to have, your voices heard as to how to manage that in a more appropriate way. So, any last comments that you
Hmm.
would have for Albertans as it relates directly to an Alberta pension plan?
Okay. The bit about, oh, don't touch my pension, some things maybe get me angry, actually, because what has happened is that past generations of people have basically indebted the country with this 2 trillion plus unfunded liability, and then they have the audacity to say, don't fix this, and their children are struggling to start families, to buy houses, to get by. They're facing higher taxes. You have mortgaged the farm and left the debt for your children to pay off. How brutal can you be towards your future generations? Don't give this moral high horse silliness. It is crazy. It's like people who build all these regulations to protect their industry so everyone else is poor. It is unthinkable that they would have the moral high ground over hurting the next generation with higher taxes, unpredictable future, more debts to pay, and not giving them the chance to forge their own future. Second, how many of you have met any of the actual, let's say, regime politicians in Ottawa? I've met none of them, right? They're a secluded cloister or whatever, a class of people. How many of you met the premier or the local people in Alberta? I don't even live in Alberta. I've met Kenny. I've met Danielle. I mean, I know them. They're accessible. As smaller, the closer you get to your jurisdiction, the more accountability there is. So, look, I would just love to see Albertans have some stomach, some pride, and not be intimidated by all these lofty words from the central
Wow,
government.
I think that is the perfect place to end it. With that in
Okay.
mind, though, Fergus, where can people find your book and where can they follow, your articles and your writings?
Yeah. So the book is done. It's going through processing. I've been trying to register a specific domain, but they're not letting me get a .ca. You can go to econamericas.com/newsletter and leave your email there. You'll get an update when the book is going to be released. You can also, so that's Econ Americas econamericas.com/newsletter. You can also follow me on LinkedIn or Twitter, just Fergus Hodgson. I'm easy to find, and there'll be updates there. The book should be available in the next week or two. Just my team are working on the finer details, so it's not available yet, but
And now
ASAP.
that I got you here,
Yeah.
I expect I'm going to get a copy.
You do make an appearance, Nadine. Actually, I quote you a couple of times, so
Oh,
you appear
wow.
in the
That's
book. Yeah.
wonderful. Thank you again so much for your insight. And, for me, what I'm trying to shed upon people is trying to find credible sources that can speak to this intelligently. And certainly you've shown us,
Mm.
the depth and breadth of your understanding of this particular topic. And, so grateful to have people like yourself that are willing to share the opinions and just tell it the way that it is. So, from that perspective, thank you so very much. And we may just have to do this again.
Thank you, Nadine. Thanks for your kind words, and keep up the great work. Cheers.
Wonderful. Cheers.